Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Tom Sayer and I'm a program manager here at Google, working on ways that Google can support education leaders such as yourselves as you use technology as a catalyst for change. Every teacher, every parent, every community member, indeed every one of us here today has had around 16,000 hours of personal experience in a traditional education setting. In fact, those of us who have taught have had much more than this when you include the time we've spent teaching. That's a lot of time. The 16,000 hours is a weight that prevents change. Even if you can persuade or be persuaded consciously of the reasons for change, these 16,000 hours might still work subconsciously to resist it. It's human nature. But at the same time, we know we need change. The world is constantly evolving. Google recently commissioned economist research on the skills needed in the workplace, and they're not what they once were. Workplaces need problem solving, creativity, teamwork. None of this is surprising to any of you, so why is it so hard to change? Because culture can resist change, whether it's the culture in a district, in a school, or in a classroom. But luckily it doesn't have to. A culture of innovation releases people from the weight of their previous experience. In some ways, it's a prerequisite for change. Today, I'd like to talk to you about 3 elements of a culture of innovation that can help free your systems from this weight of experience. Now, this presentation is largely aimed at leaders, but while it's focused at the leaders of a district or a school or a teacher leader, the lessons can also apply to a teacher as the leader of their classroom. So Astro Teller is the head of Google X, which many of you will have heard of. It's Google's internal R&D department. If you ask Astro what he does, he says his primary role is a cultural engineer. He talks about how, on the one hand, as a leader, you have your plans, your initiatives, all the great things you've learned and trialed and researched. These are the things that you want people to do. On the other hand, you have what people actually do. Now, what people actually do is probably not the opposite of what you want them to do, but it's probably not the same. What people actually do is follow the emotional paths of least resistance. They do the things that are easiest for them emotionally. In education, the culture created by those 16,000 hours of experience all but guarantees that what you want people to do and what people actually do aren't aligned. Cultural engineering is the deliberate effort to make what you want them to do and what they actually do the same thing. And make no mistake, this cultural engineering is hard. In businesses across Silicon Valley, the culture instilled by the company's founders often remains incredibly strong, even after they've left. We call this the founder's DNA. And it's the same in education, except in this case, the founders lived decades, if not centuries ago, and established a culture for a very different time. To change a culture, to move beyond the founder's DNA, it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of time, and it must be deliberate. But if you ignore culture, you can be sure that what you want people to do is never what they actually do. So what are the elements of culture that need to be in place to allow innovation to spread and change to happen? The details will be very different for every situation and context, but at Google, we brought together 2 sets of research to identify common elements of culture that apply more broadly. First, Google conducted extensive research to identify the elements of high-performing teams. You may have seen it in the press. Our HR department looked at more than 250 attributes across nearly 200 teams, and from this, they found a number of attributes that rose to the top in terms of their impact on team performance. Second, Google for Education spoke with students and teachers, school leaders, school systems leaders from around the world, and we tried to identify what was different between the cultures of the most innovative and the least innovative schools. Taken together, we found 3 elements that help make a culture of innovation. First, risk-taking and agency in the classroom. Do teachers feel free to do what they think is best for their students? Second, collaboration in the school. Are teachers working together and supporting one another? And finally, trust in the entire system. Do leaders trust their staff, and do the staff trust their leaders? Oops, forgot to scroll through. Together, these set the conditions where people will accept and potentially thrive on innovation and change. So let's begin with the one that may seem the scariest, particularly in education. allowing and encouraging teachers and students to take risks, or the closely related point, giving teachers and students agency to do what they think is best, releasing some control. In Google's research on teams, the #1 factor for a high-performing team was psychological safety. Can we take risks on this team without feeling insecure or embarrassed? If you think about the systems that you work in, do your teachers feel like they have the freedom to try new things without fear of being judged by their peers or their leadership? This is important because as a leader, you can't plan for every context. Let me give an example. Let's say that your team has decided on the best way to teach early childhood literacy. You've done the research and this is the proven best method. So you send a message out to everybody that they should use this method because it's been proven to work. This is what you want people to do. But each of the classrooms that this message goes out to is very different, and you can't provide a manual for how this new method will work in every single one, with every student, in every situation. So now put yourself in the position of a teacher who's been asked to do this. If they're to make this new method work, they're going to need to try new things, to improvise and adjust the method. But if they're scared of trying something different, then the easiest option, the emotional path of least resistance, is either to do exactly what you've been told, in which case the method probably won't work, or to say that the method is a bad idea and simply refuse to do it. So what you want them to do and what people actually do is different. And the flip side of this is that if teachers feel like they have the freedom to try something new, they may discover an even more effective approach than you had found. You can then learn from this and help spread it throughout the system. One of the mantras at Google is that innovation comes from anywhere. Gmail was a part-time project from an engineer, for example. And unleashing the creative potential of everyone in your school system can lead to more success than trying to do it all by yourself or with a small team. In order to engineer this culture of risk-taking, you need to be very deliberate. Of course, you don't want to reward every type of failure. If someone burns down the school, you probably shouldn't give them a high five. But you can encourage constructive failure and remove the fear of failing. At Google X, they want people to take on projects that are so bold that they're likely to fail. The slide you see now is their philosophy for solving huge problems. But people don't like doing things that are likely to fail. Failure isn't how you get a promotion or a salary increase or even a pat on the back. So at Google X, they made a very public display of rewarding teams that have tried and failed. The first time they put someone on stage and gave them a round of applause for their project failing, people got confused. The 10th time they did it, and when people saw that members of those teams that had had projects that had failed continued to do well and potentially had gotten promotions, it became clear to everyone that taking risks was valued and it became part of the culture. A school is, of course, different to an engineering group at Google, but you still need to be deliberate in encouraging risk-taking. A common question is often, well, how can we experiment in schools? What about the failed experiments and the impacts on students? I personally believe there's a difference between uncontrolled experimentation and giving teachers and schools the freedom to take controlled risks in the best interests of each learner. It's similar to healthcare. We don't want doctors to try out some homemade medicine on us, but we do want them to take their depth of knowledge and try whatever they can to make us better. A couple of examples show how this might work in schools. I should also say this is a picture of Superintendent Devin Vodichka, which is not part of Summit Public Schools, but this picture worked better, and we'll come back to Vista Unified later. So at Summit Public Schools, though, failure is considered very differently, and it begins with the students. With a particular skill or concept, students don't pass or fail. They've either mastered it or they are still to master it. This tells the students and their teachers that failure is not the end. It's just a stepping stone to further achievement. And it can extend to teachers too. San Juan schools replaced their old evaluation system, which punished failure, with a new system that rewarded continual improvement. They also set up 2 new programs. One was a peer support system for veteran teachers struggling with technology, and the other one was a mentoring system for new teachers. All of these taken together said that the leadership expect teachers will fail and that the system will support them when they do. The second of the 3 elements is collaboration between teachers within a school. The value of teams and teamwork in delivering the best outcome isn't new to any of you. Teams are consistently shown to identify better solutions and execute on those solutions more effectively than individuals. But collaboration also has a special role when thinking about a culture of innovation. Collaboration provides the frame around which the other elements of culture are built. If teachers collaborate, then the risks that they take are more likely to be successful. If teachers collaborate, then the innovations that occur are more likely to spread. But perhaps most importantly, if teachers collaborate, then the culture that you're trying to spread will flow throughout the system much more easily. So think of the systems that you all work in. Are teachers working together and supporting each other, or do the walls of the classroom keep teachers apart? So at Google, it's built into everything we do, collaboration. It's built into the software we use. I'll be in a Google Doc and there'll be 15 other people commenting and editing with me at the same time. Our technology is designed to break down the walls created by space and time. It's built into our physical space, obviously something that we're fairly famous for. For every seat at a desk that Google has, there's at least one seat in a collaborative space, whether it's a couch, a dining area, or a pool table. And it's in the stories we tell. I remember my induction training at Google. One of the Googlers leading the session spoke about a time she was called out by a senior leader for not giving credit to her entire team when she was presenting on her project. It's a very simple story, but it stuck with me and reminds me to never think of myself as an individual. Whatever I do at Google has been the output of a team collaboration. Schools and classrooms are currently built on a culture of individualism. Someone said to me a while ago, imagine if we treated employees like we treat students. What would your boss say if you turned in a project and presented on a project and said that you didn't have any help from anybody else? You didn't speak to anybody else and that it was entirely your work. Your boss probably wouldn't be impressed. So why do we set up classrooms with this perspective? The shift to collaboration is particularly hard to change in schools because classrooms and class schedules keep teachers apart. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. An important first step is to break down as many of these walls as possible. New Tech High School did this. They have multiple classes in the same room and team teach. At first glance, it looks a little chaotic, but then you realize how much energy this collaboration produces, both with the teachers and with the students. They also dedicate a third of their teaching time for teacher collaboration. It's difficult in a resource-strapped environment, but the collaboration that happens as a result makes it worthwhile. And it doesn't have to be long-term structural changes. There are things that can happen tomorrow to shift the culture from the top. West Contra Costa School District here in the Bay Area showed that leadership valued collaboration by flipping the district meeting. Instead of the superintendent using it as an opportunity to speak at the school leaders, a Google Doc was sent out before with a draft agenda that was collaboratively built up by all the participants. This turned the meeting from a top-down information push to a collaborative problem-solving session. And then this idea was taken by the school leaders and used in their own staff meetings, spreading collaboration throughout the system. The final of the three elements is the glue that binds it all together, trust. Trust between teacher and teacher, trust between teacher and school, and trust between the school and the system that they're in. Without trust, the system is driven by fear, and the emotional path of least resistance, the thing that people will actually do, won't be the same as the change you want them to embrace. With trust, on the other hand, risk-taking, innovation, and collaboration takes hold as everyone trusts everyone else to do their role. This was shown by the second and third most important factors in the Google research on teams. The second is dependability. Can we count on each other to do high-quality work on time? And the third is structure and clarity. Are goals, roles, and execution plans on our team clear? This latter one is vital for trust because if people's roles and responsibilities aren't clear, then it's hard to trust that someone will do their part. So if you think about your systems, do you trust your team and do they trust you? Trust has to be earned and demonstrated, but there are concrete actions that can be taken. At Google, we have something called TGIF, Thank Google It's Friday, which happens on Thursday for some reason. Every week, the founders of the company, Larry and Sergey, who you see on this slide, stand in front of the whole company and they talk about the week. Then they invite teams to come up and share what they've been working on. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, they spend around 30 minutes every week taking questions from anyone in the company. We use a combination of an online system so that everyone has a voice and live questions from people who are watching in person. And the leaders don't get to cherry pick what they answer, and the questions can be really tough. trusts its employees with confidential information, and that employees trust leadership to answer their questions and concerns. In schools, there are a lot of processes that, while they may be necessary, don't promote a culture of trust and innovation. One of these is high-stakes testing. At Vista Unified School District near San Diego, with Superintendent Devin Vodichka, he actually presented a session that I watched about 2 hours ago, for some of you may have seen. He came into the district with an ambitious plan for change. But he knew that that he wouldn't have a culture of innovation if high-stakes testing was the primary focus. So he worked with the school board to suspend teacher evaluations for 5 years. That's powerful. That's the leader not just saying he wanted change, but backing it up with action. Of course, I realize this isn't realistic everywhere, and it's also important to have measures and controls. But you have to be aware of the secondary impact of these controls. With high-stakes testing, that's teaching to the test and a reluctance to try anything new. But there are still plenty of ways to promote trust in this environment, whether it's a school leader creating a forum for hearing their staff's concerns, or the district finding ways to honestly communicate with their wider system. There was a recent OECD conference in Israel, and at the end of the conference, the Israeli Minister of Education said that his biggest takeaway from the conference was trust. He needed to trust his teachers as much as he trusted any other vital professional in his country. And this may be hard in some systems. Not every single teacher is going to be high performing. But you can be sure that if you don't allow teachers to take risks, if they don't collaborate, and if you don't give them your trust, then you'll get the worst out of whatever you have. Alternatively, if you do everything you can to be able to trust your teachers, many, many more will perform at their best. These three elements, risk-taking, collaboration, and trust, rely on each other and support each other. So as you think about your school systems, think about its culture. Are people willing to take risks? Do they collaborate with each other? And do they trust each other, and do you trust them? These three things are how you're going to be able to override 16,000 hours that stops the progress you want to make. But I want to leave you with a group that can help you tackle this. Your students. They don't have the 16,000 hours of experience. They're malleable, curious, wondrous, and naturally creative. They haven't had those things trained out of them yet. They are why you do what you do, and they can be your greatest allies. So to change a culture takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of time, and it must be deliberate. But by giving it this effort and attention, you can create a culture of innovation that delivers the change that we're all working so hard to achieve. That is the end of my presentation. I will dive into the questions now. Wait, one more plug. I've got to plug the Transformation Center again. Again, this is a new platform where we try and share these innovations that are happening across the world. And I'd love for people to go on there and look what's in there and give us feedback and share the things that you're doing so that we can share them out. And now I will switch off so that you can see me. How do I get out of this? Here I am. Right, some questions. Let's see if I have any questions. A lot of people saying hello. Okay, there are a lot of questions from people saying hello from various different places. Hello to Holly from Alaska. And Jamie from Brazil. More people from Alaska. Why does TGIF happen on a Thursday? Okay, thank you, Ryan. That's something I can answer. Why does TGIF, well, sorry, that's a question that I can potentially answer. TGIF happens on a Thursday, I think because they used to do it on a Friday, but people are not necessarily in their most receptive and engaged mood last thing on a Friday. People are thinking about the weekend. They're wanting to avoid the horrendous traffic in the Bay Area and get back home. So they wanted people to be engaged with the content and with what people and with the questions and the dialogue. And so they moved it to a Thursday. Are the elderly also taken into consideration? From Serena. I'm not sure I follow this question. Are the elderly also taken into consideration? I'm going to answer a question, which may or may not be what you're going to try and say, but is how do you how do you think about a culture of change with people who are closer to the ends of their career and therefore have spent much more than those 16,000 hours in a traditional education setting? I think the principles still largely apply. I think teachers still care and they still want to do what's best for their students. I agree it's potentially harder if you have 5 times that. If you have 100,000 hours of experience in a traditional setting, then change can be even harder. But I think it's still around collaboration and trust. What I said San Juan School District did, which was putting in place programs to support veteran teachers and accept that it may be harder for them and be open. They are going to be contributing so much in various ways that more junior teachers can't. So celebrating that fact and then acknowledging as a group that, you know what, the change may be harder for some of the more veteran teachers. Okay, let's have a look, some more questions. How would you establish a culture that supports change in Google for Education in multiple, oh, sorry, this keeps refreshing and jumping up and down. What is that question from? Oh, in multiple countries, languages differentially, country by country. From Scott. Oh, these questions are coming thick and fast now, and it's moving them up and down. So I'm not sure if this is answering the question. I think different countries are different, and that's why cultural nuances will certainly change within different systems. I'm British, as everyone can know, and so that the culture in British schools is different from the culture in American schools. I still think, risk-taking is probably one of the 3 elements that I mentioned that probably varies the most by different countries that I've seen, certainly, and the willingness to let people take risks. I think it's going to be much harder in some countries which don't have, that don't push down responsibility to the lowest levels quite to the extent that the US does. But I still think it's vital. I don't see how change can happen if teachers aren't allowed to take controlled risks. Okay. This platform is quite annoying that it keeps jumping up and down. What tips for culture change would you suggest for new principals coming into schools where most teachers have 10 to 20 years of experience at the school? So for this, I think it probably starts with trust and collaboration. When you come into, and I think this applies whether it's a school or whatever managerial role someone's taking on, where there are people who have been doing that for a long time. So I used to be in the military, and I was an officer. And when I would take over a new group, you would rely so heavily on the senior non-commissioned officers who have that experience, and you would trust in their experience and judgment and use that to help you. So I would spend a good period of time listening. I don't think the very first few months that someone takes control of anything is a time for change. I think it's a time for listening. And I think by listening, which is a key component of collaboration, I think that by listening, you set the grounds for trust, and then everybody will trust each other, and then you'll be able to lead change when you're 6, 9, 12 months into the role. But I wouldn't recommend whole-scale changes as soon as a new principal takes over, unless it's something drastic and immediate that needs to be fixed. Suggested methods for introducing these ideas to principals and superintendents. I'm going to throw that back on you. I would love people's ideas on how we can make this as valuable and useful as possible, these concepts. And it's something we're proactively working on now at Google for Education, is how we can support schools and districts as they try and instill a culture of innovation. And I would love your ideas. So Jane, if you email me or tweet me, I would love to hear your thoughts. What are some ways these methods can be applied to teachers lower in the admin totem pole? Oh, we have a response as well by Ryan. I'll just read his, that'll save me thinking. You can conduct a book study on the book Leading Change by John Cotter. This can easily be done through Google Classroom and have teachers join in a class as a student. It keeps moving around. Yeah, I think teachers lower in the admin totem pole, as I mentioned at the beginning, it was targeted at school leaders and district leaders this session, but I think the elements, it would be very hard to have a completely different culture within a classroom or within a cohort, a peer cohort of teachers, and compared to the culture within the wider school or the wider district. So I do think that some of these principles, allowing collaboration, giving trust to students, applies within the classroom and will help ensure that that culture is for the whole school and not just for the leadership, which I don't think really is possible. Okay, let's do a couple more questions before the time's up. What is the best way to balance encouraging students to feel free to fail and evaluation with grades, which our parents and schools insist on? Really good question, Karen. I think part of this comes down to community and the culture within the wider community. I don't think it's possible to have a community that has a culture of compliance based around high stakes testing and to really have a culture of innovation within the schools, because ultimately our schools are for our community and our parents are so crucial. So I think this culture, once it's embedded within a school, will hopefully spread to the parents, but it involves a really concerted effort to communicate with the communities that the schools are within in order to help them understand why these changes are happening, and so that they are part of it, not just seeing the results. An example, so Summit Public Schools here in the Bay Area, who moved to a competency mastery-based system. They really had this problem. Even though people came into the school knowing that this was the system, they still struggled in helping parents understand that the traditional report card with A, B, C, D, E, F wasn't going to be coming home, that they were going to be seeing their students' progress in a different way. But they just had a very open and honest conversation with the parents about why they were doing this, and asked the parents, well, how would you like us to be treating your students? And that communication allowed the parents to see why that change was necessary, and that specific change was important in order to allow students to feel free to fail. Okay, last one, so we've gone over time. Some old dogs don't like learning new tricks, perceive changes as the same old stuff with a different name packaged differently. How do we change that mindset? Ultimately, there will be some, whether it's a school or a company, there are going to be some people who don't buy into the new agenda, the new way of doing things, and in this case, innovation. I believe that those people will be in the minority, and when the culture of innovation takes hold, they will choose to leave. Whenever there is a big cultural shift, people will leave that system because people joined that system some people joined that system for the culture that it currently has. And so it's one of the harder parts of this is you need to expect people will leave because they don't want that new culture. I think for there's a different group of people who have the mindset that you say, but I think once they start to see the benefits that come from it, and once they feel the trust from their leadership, once they collaborate with other teachers, so they're not just siloed, they can't just lock themselves in and say, oh, this is just the same old stuff. They're collaborating with other teachers, so they're being brought along with this cultural change. Then I think this other group of teachers will change their mindsets. So it's either they will change their mindsets through the collaboration and the culture that's built, or they won't and they'll leave. That's a nice negative note to finish on. Thank you all so much for joining. Visit the Transformation Center, please. The link to the Transformation Center is in the slide deck that you can get from the website. Share your ideas and stories with us. Yeah, and have a great rest of your day.